Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Coffee with Greg, where we talk about all things firearms, firearms policy, politics, culture, media, you name it. We're talking about right here on Coffee with Greg. So please take a moment, like and share the program so that your friends can join in the conversation as it is happening. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and click the notification button so that you guys can join the conversation. Well, once again, as soon as it comes on, you'll get the notifications as soon as we go live. Also, would like to encourage you to please go to fpcgear.com. That's fpcgear.com. The place to go to get pro-Second Amendment swag, T-shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, you name it, we've got it. But not only do we have it, but every dollar that you spend goes right back into the fight for a right to keep and bear arms so you can support the Second Amendment and you can look good doing it. That's fpcgear.com. Speaking about supporting the Second Amendment, before we get started with that, let me just wish each and every one of you a very happy Valentine's Day. I don't know about you guys, but, well, I am in love. Not just with my wife, but also with my right to keep and bear arms. And I get very, very frustrated whenever I see it, whenever I see folks coming after it, as they are starting to do, or they've been doing, but they're doing right now in Washington, D.C. Many of you may also know that today is also the 1-year anniversary of the Parkland shooting in Florida. Interesting thing with that is, anti-gunners, you know the saying, Rahm Emanuel, never let a good tragedy go to waste. Well, guess what? Rahm Emanuel is not, or at least the Democrats in the House are not letting a good tragedy go to waste. They have decided to use the anniversary of the Parkland shooting to introduce an interesting piece of anti-Second Amendment legislation. I think you'll find it quite interesting. Check it out real quick.
Craig, thank you. It's been almost 1 year since the deadly school shooting in Parkland, and two Democrats in Congress are marking the date with a new push to ban high-capacity gun magazines. Congressman Ted Deutsch of South Florida, who represents Parkland, teamed up with Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey today to announce the legislation.
Large-capacity ammunition has one purpose: allowing someone to kill as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, without having to stop and reload. A high-capacity magazine that holds 30 or 60 or even 90 rounds of ammunition is not for hunting, and it's not for self-defense.
It is not too soon to talk about strengthening our gun laws. It's not too soon to pass this bill. It is not too soon to give the American people a few extra seconds that can save lives.
Well, most recent gun control proposals have sought to improve background checks. This bill would ban magazines that hold more than 10 rounds of ammunition. The NRA says the legislation would ban commonly owned firearms for self-defense. In order for the bill to pass, some Republicans would have to cross the aisle and vote for the bill.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this. First of all, I don't know what high-capacity ammunition is, which I think is a demonstration, first and foremost, that these legislators, or at least Mr. Menendez, has absolutely no idea what he's talking about. But they're talking about what is what they refer to as high-capacity magazines. Now, I refer to them as largely standard capacity magazines, because one of the things that that's interesting about this whole argument. And, we're always talking about, why aren't we willing to compromise? But as I said, usually compromise is this, okay, we're going to take away your rights. We're only going to negotiate how much of your rights we're going to take away. It's kind of like saying, okay, I'm going to cut off your fingers. Let's negotiate how many we're going to cut off. I'm going to start at 5. And, who knows, maybe we'll settle somewhere around 1 or 2. But in this particular case, I just found it interesting that, number one, where did the number 10 rounds come from? I don't understand why 10 rounds is the quote unquote magic number, and why anything over 10 rounds is considered high capacity. Notice that in his remarks, the representative or the senator actually mentioned, he talked about 30 round magazines. He talked about 60 or 100. Notice that he completely and utterly skipped over the fact that, for example, most firearms, most handguns our semi-automatic handguns have an average capacity of between 15 and 18 rounds. Now, there are some with less than 10, but for the most part, most of them are somewhere between 12 to 18 or 15 to 18. But I find it quite interesting that they specifically jump to 30, 60, and 100 rounds. Now, most long guns generally tend to have magazine capacities of 20 to 30 rounds. See, that's the reason why we call these, it's not just a high capacity magazine, and not that I have anything against high capacity magazines, but why is it not standard capacity magazines, since these are the average capacities that these are the average magazines that these firearms are actually designed to hold? It makes absolutely no sense to me that they would, it makes total sense to me. The sense is that they want to sensationalize. And just like when they start talking about banning the number or reducing the number of firearms that you can purchase in a month, like they do here in California, trying to restrict it to just one a month, they never say, well, if a person buys 3. They never say, well, if a person buys 2. They always say, well, a person could go and buy a truckload, or a person could go and buy 100 firearms in a particular at one time. Once again, they always seek out the outrageous in order to then place a restriction that also happens to be outrageous. Now, the other interesting thing about this particular piece of legislation is, once again, they're using as their inspiration the shooting that took place in Parkland, Florida. There's only one problem. The shooter at Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida used 10-round magazines. Now, I don't know why he used 10-round magazines. Evidently, they said that larger magazines wouldn't fit in his backpack. I don't know what kind of backpack he was using, but that's what they said. They said that he only used 10-round magazines because the 30-rounders couldn't fit in his backpack. That having been said, that means that this particular measure would have done absolutely nothing to keep what happened in Parkland, Florida from happening. It would have done nothing. It would have had absolutely no effect. And once again, this is how they do things. They here, at least in California, have made it a point to say, well, we realize that this legislation wouldn't stop mass shootings. They realize that it wouldn't stop gun violence, but they keep saying we have to do something. Now, I find it interesting that individuals who know absolutely nothing about firearms with their high-capacity ammunition would then turn around and say that these magazines wouldn't be used or couldn't be used in self-defense. So if they can't be used in self-defense, then why is it that law enforcement is generally exempted from these magazine bans? Are they going to force these same magazine bans upon law enforcement? Is law enforcement going to be required to have a magazine capacity of no more than 10 rounds? Because if they're not no good in self-defense, well, then what's the point? Why does law enforcement need that? In fact, since you believe, Mr. Menendez, that law enforcement is so more properly trained, because I know that's generally what you folks seem to say, well, they're so much more trained, well, then why do they need more rounds than I do? If they're so much more trained at how to handle a firearm, how to shoot a firearm, how to be safe with the firearm, why do they need why do they need more rounds than I do? One would think with that level of training, you would want them, they would be in a position where they would require fewer rounds of ammunition in order to be able to take down a perpetrator. One would think. But then again, when you don't know what you're talking about, then, well, logic really doesn't matter. And as I can tell from the March for March for Your Lives or March for Our Lives folks behind you, I already know that they don't know what they're talking about. But then again, knowledge and understanding and really getting to know the subject area is not something that anti-gunners generally do when they're seeking to take away our right to keep and bear arms. It's just not something that they do. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you guys. Once again, if anyone asks you, if you guys see these stories, please make sure to remind them he used 10-round magazines. The shooter in Parkland, Florida used 10-round magazines. This bill, as with most gun control, would do absolutely nothing and would save absolutely 0 lives. Anyway, folks, that's going to be it for today's Coffee with Craig. Thank you so much for tuning in. We very much appreciate you liking and sharing this program, telling your friends about the Firearms Policy Coalition. We are the home in the fight for civil rights. Got to use them or you're going to lose them. You guys take care.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.